The sound ripped through the sterile silence of Cedar Creek Estates, like a shotgun blast in a library. It was a deep, resonant boom that rattled double-paned windows and immediately triggered a symphony of car alarms and hysterical dogs. Within seconds, the perfectly manicured cul-de-sac was flooded with neighbors, all staring at the same house. Brenda Barlow's house. Thick, acrid, black smoke was pumping out of her pristine, HOA-approved faux stone chimney. It wasn't the cozy smoke of a winter fire. This was angry, volcanic smoke. And there she was, Brenda Barlow, HOA President and neighborhood tyrant, staggering onto her driveway. Her usually helmet-like blonde bob was standing on end, singed at the tips, and her face was smeared with soot like war paint. She was screaming hysterically, something unintelligible about defective materials and lawsuits. But as I stood on my porch, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand, I knew exactly what had happened. There were no defective materials. There was only applied physics and a healthy dose of karma. You see, for the past month, Brenda had been treating my backyard like her personal lumberyard. She'd sneak in under the cover of darkness, helping herself to my stacked, seasoned oak, the very same oak she had fined me $500 for storing, claiming it violated the aesthetic harmony of the community and lowered property values. Every time I replenished the stock, more vanished, so I decided to adjust the inventory. I stopped putting out regular logs and got inventive, because in an HOA ruled by someone like Brenda, logic and reason are just abstract concepts. They only understand consequences when those consequences literally blow up in their face. Before we dive into the glorious details of this HOA meltdown, I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this video from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments below. And if you love hearing about Karens getting exactly what they deserve, make sure you're subscribed to Keys and Chaos and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up. Before the smoke, the fines, and the midnight larceny, life in Cedar Creek Estates was aggressively peaceful. It's the kind of neighborhood that looks less like a place where people live and more like a movie set for a film about the dystopian suburbs. Every lawn is cut to precisely 1.5 inches. Every house is painted in one of 5 approved shades of beige, and every neighbor smiles, though the smiles rarely reach their eyes. I moved here about 5 years ago. I'm a retired mechanical engineer. I spent 40 years designing systems, understanding stress points, thermodynamics, and the precise application of force. When my wife, Maria, passed away, the silence in our old house was too loud. I figured a smaller place, a managed community, might offer some structure, some simplicity. I wanted peace. What I got was a dictatorship disguised as a homeowners association. Initially, I kept a low profile. I converted my garage into a small workshop, soundproofed it, of course, because I knew the rules, and spent my days tinkering. My backyard was my sanctuary. It was modest, a small patio, a vegetable garden, strictly adhering to the approved plant list, and my pride and joy, the woodpile. I don't just buy pre-cut logs, I source the wood myself from a friend's property upstate. I cut it, I split it, and I season it for at least a year. There's a rhythm to it. The swing of the axe, the clean split of the grain, it's therapeutic. It's real. In a neighborhood made of plastic and pretense, my woodpile was the most honest thing on the block. Most of the neighbors were fine. The Jacksons on the left were friendly enough. Old Mrs. Gable on the right was the neighborhood historian. It was manageable. Until she arrived. Brenda Barlow moved in 2 years ago. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with a voice that could cut steel. She carried herself with the unjustified confidence of someone who believes their opinion is objective fact. She didn't just move into the neighborhood, she annexed it. Within 3 months, she was the HOA president. I don't recall an election. There might have been a meeting I missed, but somehow she had seized the gavel, the clipboard, and the absolute authority to make everyone's life miserable. Brenda loved rules, but not in the way that ensures safety or community well-being. She loved rules as weapons. She weaponized the bylaws. She'd patrol the streets, not just walking, but marching, ruler in hand, measuring the distance between garbage cans and the curb. She'd take photos of alleged violations, a mailbox tilted 2 degrees to the left, a garden hose left out overnight, a single dandelion daring to bloom in a pristine lawn. Our first official encounter happened about a month into her presidency. I was in my workshop when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Brenda, smiling the way a shark smiles before it bites. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, "we need to discuss your backyard." "Oh," I replied, wiping grease off my hands. "What about it?" She handed me a crisp white envelope. "It has come to the board's attention that your lumber storage violates Section 4, subsection B of the Community Aesthetic Guidelines. It is visible from the sidewalk." I looked past her, down the street. My woodpile was stacked neatly against the back fence, partially obscured by a large lilac bush. You would have to crane your neck at a very specific angle to even glimpse it. "Brenda, it's firewood. It's stacked behind the lilac." She tilted her head, a gesture I would soon learn meant she was about to say something monumentally stupid. "But the potential for visibility is there, Arthur, and it disrupts the uniformity of the neighborhood. It looks rustic." She said rustic like it was a disease. "It's supposed to look rustic," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's wood." She didn't blink. "We are not a rustic community, Arthur. We are an upscale executive estate. You have 7 days to relocate the wood to a fully enclosed structure, or the HOA will begin issuing daily fines." She turned on her heel and marched away. I didn't move the wood. Instead, I bought a tarp, an HOA-approved beige tarp, and covered the pile. It was a compromise. It should have been enough. But with Brenda, compromise is a sign of weakness, and weakness invites escalation.
A week later, the fines started arriving. $50 a day for failure to comply with aesthetic standards. Apparently, the beige tarp was also rustic. I was starting to think Brenda just didn't like wood. I called her. I emailed the board. I requested a hearing. My requests were ignored or denied due to procedural errors in my application. It was bureaucratic quicksand. Then, the real trouble started. It was late October. The air was getting crisp, and I was looking forward to the first fire of the season. I went out back to grab a few logs, and I noticed something odd. The pile looked smaller. When you stack wood for as long as I have, you develop an eye for volume. It wasn't a subtle difference. It looked like a significant chunk was missing from the top layer. My first thought was that maybe some local kids were playing a prank, or perhaps a neighbor had run short during a cold snap and borrowed a few logs. I didn't mind sharing, but usually people ask. I shrugged it off. I reorganized the pile, made sure the tarp was secure, and went back inside. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, the difference was undeniable. At least a dozen logs were gone. I started to get angry. It wasn't about the money. It was the principle, the audacity of someone trespassing on my property, stealing from me while I was being fined daily for the very thing they were taking. I started asking around. I mentioned it to the Jacksons. "Hey, have you guys seen anyone messing around near my backyard? I seem to be missing some firewood." Mr. Jackson frowned. "Firewood? Nah, haven't seen anything. But Brenda was complaining the other day at the clubhouse about the rising cost of heating oil." I filed that away. It was a clue, perhaps, but not enough to accuse the HOA president of petty theft. The thefts continued. Every few nights, more wood vanished. Always the best pieces, the driest, cleanest cuts. Whoever was doing this knew what they were looking for. I needed proof. I needed to know who was treating my backyard like a free hardware store. So I decided to set a trap. Not a physical trap, but an identification trap. I went into my workshop and selected about 20 logs from the top of the pile. Using a fine chisel, I carved a small, unique mark on the underside of each one. A tiny stylized A. It was subtle enough to go unnoticed unless you were looking for it, but distinct enough that I could identify my wood anywhere. Then, I installed a motion-activated floodlight above the back gate. It was bright, startling, and definitely not HOA approved, but at this point, I didn't care. That night, I waited. Around midnight, the floodlight snapped on, bathing the yard in harsh white light. I rushed to the window. I caught a glimpse of movement near the gate, a figure retreating quickly. They were fast. But as they slipped through the gate, the light caught something, a reflection off a shiny, expensive-looking coat and the distinct shape of high-heeled boots. High heels in a backyard at midnight. My mind immediately went to Brenda. She was the only person I knew who wore high heels to walk her dog. But still, it wasn't definitive. The next morning, I checked the woodpile. 6 of the marked logs were gone, and there in the soft earth near the gate were the unmistakable impressions of narrow heels. The plot thickened, and so did my frustration. Later that day, another letter arrived from the HOA. This one was different. It wasn't just a fine, it was a warning. Dear Mr. Vance, your continued disregard for community guidelines regarding the storage of flammable materials poses a significant risk to the neighborhood. Furthermore, your newly installed unauthorized lighting fixture is causing light pollution and disturbing the peace. If these violations are not remedied immediately, the HOA will be forced to consider escalation, including the forced removal of the offending materials. Signed, Brenda Barlow, President, Cedar Creek Estates, HOA. I nearly choked on my sandwich. The sheer, unmitigated gall. She was fining me for the wood she was stealing, complaining about the light I installed to catch her, and threatening to confiscate the rest of the pile. She wasn't just stealing, she was using her position to facilitate the theft. I knew I had to confront her, but I had to be smart. She was a master manipulator. She would twist the narrative, deny everything, and probably accuse me of harassment. So, I decided to take a drive. I drove past her house, slow and casual, and there it was. Through her large bay window, illuminated by the soft glow of a fire, was her living room, and sitting next to her ornate marble fireplace was a brass log holder stacked high with freshly cut oak. I pulled over. I got out of the car and walked closer, pretending to check my phone. And there, on the top log, clear as day, was my mark, the stylized A. She was burning the evidence. She was heating her home with my stolen wood while simultaneously condemning me for owning it. I stood there, stunned by the hypocrisy. I could have knocked on her door, but I knew how that would end. Confrontation is oxygen to people like Brenda. They thrive on drama. If I lost my temper, she won. Instead, a slow smile spread across my face. A plan began to form in my mind. An engineer's plan. A plan involving wood, physics, and a little bit of chemistry. All right, Brenda. You want my firewood? You can have it. That night, I went into my workshop. I pulled out my old drafting table, dusted off my tools, and started sketching. I wasn't planning anything dangerous. I was looking for poetic justice. I wanted Brenda to experience the consequences of her actions in a way she could never forget. I looked at my inventory. Some leftover oak from an old project, a canister of black powder I used for antique firearms restoration, and a lifetime of frustration with petty tyrants. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. The next chapter in this HOA war was about to begin, and it was going to be spectacular.
The next few days were a flurry of activity. I was energized, focused. I had a project, and this project was fueled by a righteous indignation that warmed me better than any fireplace. But before I could execute the final phase of my plan, I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. I needed Brenda Barlow, on camera, in high definition, committing the crime. In Brenda's world, if it wasn't documented, time-stamped, and notarized, it didn't happen. So I decided to give her the documentation she loves so much. I went to the electronics store and bought 3 high-end outdoor security cameras, small, discreet, with 4K resolution, night vision, and immediate cloud backup. This wasn't just surveillance, this was cinematography. I spent an afternoon mounting them. One I hid inside a birdhouse, an HOA-approved birdhouse, ironically, angled directly at the woodpile. Another I mounted under the eaves of my roof, giving a wide-angle view of the backyard and the gate. The third, just for good measure, I placed near the gate itself, hidden within the lilac bush, pointing toward the street. They were virtually invisible. Then I waited. The anticipation was agonizing. I checked the camera app on my phone obsessively. The first 2 nights, nothing. I started to worry. Had the floodlight scared her off? But on the 3rd night, at 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed, motion detected in the backyard. I held my breath and opened the app, and there she was. Brenda, dressed in a black parka, dark leggings, and those same ridiculous high-heeled boots. She moved with a surprising stealth, flashlight in hand, cutting a beam through the darkness. She walked straight up to my woodpile, bold as brass, like she was browsing the aisles of a department store. I watched the screen, mesmerized by her audacity. She didn't rush. She took her time, selecting the logs carefully, picking the best ones. She stacked them neatly in a small canvas bag she had brought with her. The audio picked up a faint whisper. She was talking to herself. "He has too much anyway. It's a hazard. I'm actually doing him a favor." I had to stifle a laugh. Doing me a favor? The delusion was staggering. She loaded the bag, brushed her hands together with a self-satisfied air, and strutted back toward the gate. As she passed the lilac bush, she looked directly into the hidden camera, unknowingly giving me a perfect, clear shot of her face. It was better than a mug shot. The next morning, I made a pot of strong coffee and watched the footage again. It was glorious. Every frame was a masterpiece of petty crime. Now, a reasonable person would have taken this footage straight to the police, but I knew better. The police wouldn't take a firewood theft seriously, especially when the perpetrator was the HOA president. They'd call it a civil dispute. If I accused her outright, she'd lawyer up, deny everything, and probably sue me for defamation. I needed a public forum. I needed an audience. That afternoon, I saw a notice posted on the community bulletin board. Emergency HOA meeting, scheduled for Wednesday evening. Topic: addressing ongoing security concerns and community standards. It was her move. She was setting the stage to finally confiscate my woodpile and probably fine me into oblivion. She was going to use the meeting to paint me as the villain. Perfect. I was going to use it to expose her. We're about halfway through this insane story, and trust me, it's about to get explosive. If you're enjoying the downfall of this HOA Karen, take a second right now to hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and it tells me you want more stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Don't miss the conclusion. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and repressed resentment. I usually avoided these meetings like the plague, but this time I arrived early. I took a seat in the front row. The room was packed. Word had spread that something big was happening. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a chisel. Brenda arrived fashionably late. She was wearing a power suit, clipboard in hand, a smug smile plastered on her face. She sat at the center of the table, flanked by her two loyal lieutenants, Mrs. Henderson, the treasurer, a timid woman who jumped every time Brenda spoke, and Mr. Davis, the secretary, a man whose primary function was to nod enthusiastically. "Order," Brenda announced, rapping the gavel sharply. "This emergency meeting of the Cedar Creek Estates HOA is now in session." She cleared her throat and launched into her prepared statement. "We are here tonight to address a matter of urgent concern, the ongoing violation of community standards and the blatant disregard for safety protocols by one of our residents." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Vance," she continued, her voice dripping with condemnation, "despite repeated warnings, you have refused to comply with the bylaws regarding the storage of flammable materials. Your woodpile is not only an eyesore, it is a fire hazard. Furthermore, your recent installation of unauthorized security lighting is a disturbance." Someone in the back muttered, "The peace was disturbed when you moved in." A few chuckles rippled across the room. Brenda ignored them. "Effective immediately, the HOA is issuing a final fine of $500 and mandating the removal of the offending materials within 48 hours. If you fail to comply, the HOA will hire a contractor to remove the woodpile at your expense." She sat back, looking pleased with herself. I raised my hand calmly. "Yes, Mr. Vance," she said, patronizingly. "Do you have something to add? Please remember, this is a community forum, not a debate." I stood up slowly. "Thank you, Madam President. I'm not here to debate. I'm here to clarify a few things." I walked to the front of the room, placing my phone on the podium. "You mentioned my woodpile. You've documented it extensively, correct? Taken photos, issued fines?" "Yes, I have," she said proudly. "Thorough documentation is essential. And this documentation, it's recent, within the last week." She smirked. "As recent as yesterday afternoon." The room went quiet. "Interesting," I said, smiling, "because over the last month, nearly half of my firewood has been stolen."
Brenda blinked. She wasn't expecting that. "Stolen?" she scoffed. "Perhaps you miscalculated your usage, Arthur." "I don't miscalculate, Brenda. I'm missing nearly a half cord of seasoned oak." She opened her mouth to argue, but I kept going. "Funny thing is," I continued, my voice calm and steady, "after the second theft, I installed security cameras, not the floodlight you complained about, discreet cameras. And guess who showed up on video?" The color drained from her face. Her eyes widened in panic. "You can't do that," she stammered. "That's an invasion of privacy. It's against the bylaws." I cut her off. "The cameras are on my property, facing my backyard, perfectly legal, and the bylaws don't supersede state law regarding the protection of private property." I tapped my phone, connecting it to the large TV screen mounted on the wall. "Would anyone like to see the footage?" The room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Henderson gasped. Mr. Davis looked like he was about to faint. Brenda's face turned a brilliant shade of crimson. "This is harassment. You're fabricating evidence." "Fabricating?" I said, leaning back. "Let's see." I hit play. The screen came to life. There she was, in glorious 4K, sneaking into my backyard, flashlight in hand. The timestamp was clear, 12:47 a.m. The room watched in stunned silence as Brenda carefully selected the logs, loaded them into her bag, and strutted away. I paused the video at the moment she looked directly into the camera. There she is, our esteemed HOA President, maintaining community standards by stealing from her neighbors. Laughter erupted around the room. Even the normally stoic Mr. Jackson was chuckling. Brenda was paralyzed. You could see the gears turning in her head, trying to calculate the damage, trying to find an escape route. Finally, she puffed up her chest and hissed, "This is a setup. He manipulated the footage. You'll regret this, Arthur Vance." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The meeting descended into chaos. Mr. Davis finally stood up and nervously announced, "The board will review this matter further. Meeting adjourned." But I knew, looking at the faces around the room, that the tide had turned. Brenda's reign of terror was crumbling. The next few days were blissfully quiet. No fines, no warning letters. For a moment, I thought maybe the humiliation was enough. But I underestimated her resilience. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from a law firm threatening a lawsuit for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She was doubling down. She was going to fight this to the bitter end. That's when I knew it was time for Phase 2. The cameras had done their job. The public exposure had weakened her authority. Now it was time to deliver the knockout blow. I opened the door to my workshop, flipped on the lights, and looked at the remaining pile of logs. A wicked grin spread across my face. "All right, Brenda, let's make your next fire a little more exciting."
When you've spent 40 years as a mechanical engineer, you understand thermodynamics. You understand pressure, combustion, and the transfer of energy. Wood isn't just fuel, it's potential energy waiting to be released. I wasn't planning anything dangerous, let me be clear about that. I didn't want to hurt Brenda. I just wanted to scare the living daylights out of her. I wanted to create a spectacle so dramatic, so undeniable, that she would never even think about setting foot on my property again. The plan was simple, elegant, and deeply satisfying. I called it the Trojan Log. I selected a few pieces of scrap oak from my workshop, logs that were slightly damaged or irregular, but still looked solid from a distance. Using my lathe and a long drill bit, I carefully hollowed out the center of each log, creating a cavity about the size of a sausage. The trick was to make them look identical to the real logs. I plugged the ends with a mixture of sawdust and wood glue, then covered the plugs with bark shavings, carefully matching the texture and color. It was meticulous work, requiring patience and precision. Inside the cavities, I packed a carefully measured amount of black powder. Not enough to cause structural damage, but enough to create a very loud bang and a massive plume of smoke when ignited. It was the same kind of powder used in theatrical pyrotechnics, safe but dramatic. I also added a small amount of magnesium powder to the mix, just to give it a little extra flash. It took me 2 days to prepare 5 Trojan logs. Each one was a masterpiece of petty revenge engineering. I brushed them with ash to give them a seasoned look and stacked them right on top of the woodpile, making them easily accessible. While I worked, I imagined Brenda's face when the first log ignited. The shock, the panic, the realization that she had brought this upon herself. It was a delicious thought. But I needed to be sure she was still stealing. The lawsuit threat suggested she was escalating, but I needed confirmation that her arrogance hadn't been tempered by the humiliation. So I waited. I monitored the cameras. I kept the woodpile stocked and inviting. On the 4th night, my patience was rewarded. At 1:15 a.m., the motion alert pinged. I watched on my phone as Brenda crept into the backyard once again. This time, she was more cautious, sticking to the shadows, but the determination was still there. Her SUV was parked down the street, trunk open, waiting for the payload. She still had the nerve,
I had to give her credit for that. She went straight for the top of the pile. I watched as she loaded the logs into her bag. 1, 2, 3 of the Trojan logs. She took 2 regular logs as well, just for good measure. Once she drove off, I turned off the cameras, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. The trap was set. The fuse, metaphorically speaking, was lit.
The next day, I went about my routine as usual. Coffee, workshop, a walk around the neighborhood. As I passed Brenda's house, I saw her in the driveway, arguing with a landscaper about the precise angle of her hedges. She looked tired, stressed, but still defiant. Behind her, in the garage, I noticed her brass log holder had been replenished. My logs, including the Trojan logs, were stacked neatly, waiting for their moment in the spotlight. I smiled politely as I walked by. "Morning, Brenda. Chilly day." She turned, her tone clipped and icy. "Good morning, Arthur." "Great weather for a fire," I added, casually. Her eyes narrowed. "I suppose it is." "Just be careful," I said with a knowing smile. "You never know what might be hiding in the wood these days." She glared at me, confused and suspicious, but said nothing. That night, I settled into my favorite armchair with a glass of whiskey and a good book. I wasn't expecting a massive explosion, maybe a loud pop, some smoke, a frantic phone call to the fire department. But what happened next exceeded even my wildest expectations. It started around 8:30 p.m. I was reading a book on thermodynamics when a deep, resonant boom echoed through the neighborhood. It was loud enough to rattle the dishes in my cupboard. I put down my book and listened. Silence. Then another boom, much louder this time, followed by a brilliant flash of light that illuminated the night sky. And then the screaming started. I walked out onto my porch, just in time to see a massive plume of thick black smoke billowing from Brenda's chimney. It was like a volcano erupting from her roof. The smell of burnt sulfur and ash drifted through the air. Neighbors were already gathering in the street, phones out, pointing and shouting. I kept my expression neutral, a concerned citizen observing the chaos. I walked slowly toward the commotion. Brenda's house was a scene of pandemonium. The front windows were fogged with smoke. The chimney was belching like an industrial smokestack. Sparks were shooting out of the top, raining down on the roof. Brenda was staggering on the lawn, hair singed, face blackened with soot, wearing a silk robe that looked like it had been used to clean a barbecue grill. She was hysterical, waving her arms wildly. A fire truck arrived, sirens blaring. Firefighters jumped out and quickly assessed the situation. "It exploded!" Brenda was screaming at the fire captain. "Out of nowhere! I was just sitting there, reading, and then boom!" The fire captain, a grizzled veteran named Captain Rodriguez, tried to calm her down. "Ma'am, it looks like you had some kind of combustion event in the fireplace. Maybe a buildup of creosote or something in the wood ignited too quickly." Brenda blinked, indignant. "Creosote? My chimney is cleaned every month. It was the wood. It must have been defective." "Defective wood doesn't usually explode, ma'am, unless it's treated with something highly flammable." "I didn't treat it with anything," she shrieked. "I bought it locally." Then she stopped herself, realizing what she had said. Her eyes darted toward me. I raised an eyebrow. "Bought it locally, Brenda. That's interesting." The crowd turned toward me. The Jacksons were whispering. Mrs. Gable was smirking. Even the firefighters looked amused. Brenda's face turned a shade of purple I didn't think was possible. I sourced it," she corrected herself quickly, "from a reputable supplier." "Sourced," I repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's one way to put it." Captain Rodriguez looked between us, sensing the tension. "Ma'am, where exactly did you get this wood?"
Brenda stammered, trapped in her own lie. I don't remember. It was a delivery. A delivery? I interrupted smoothly. Funny because I have security footage that suggests otherwise. Footage of you in my backyard stealing the exact logs that are currently exploding in your fireplace. Brenda's jaw dropped. The firefighters exchanged glances. The crowd gasped. At that moment, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt satisfied. It was the satisfaction of watching a perfectly executed plan come to fruition, precise, efficient, inevitable. That night, after the fire trucks left, after the smoke cleared and the neighborhood settled down, I sat on my porch with a cold beer and looked at the faint orange glow still flickering through Brenda's windows. I raised my glass to the stars and whispered, "To engineering."
The morning after the chimney incident, as it came to be known, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, theories, and poorly concealed glee. "Did you hear the explosion? Sounded like a cannon. Brenda's fireplace blew up. I saw sparks. Karma finally found her address." I sipped my coffee and scrolled through the messages, playing the role of the innocent bystander. "Hope she's okay," I typed, with a perfectly measured dose of insincerity. By noon, a fire inspection truck was parked outside Brenda's house, along with 2 representatives from the HOA management company, and of course, Brenda herself, looking like a raccoon that had narrowly survived a wildfire. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a large floppy hat, trying to hide her singed hair and soot-stained face. I couldn't resist. I strolled over, mug in hand, casual as ever. "Morning, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "Rough night?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes burning with rage. "This isn't funny, Arthur. My house is filled with smoke. My fireplace is destroyed. I could have been killed." "Good thing you weren't," I replied evenly. "You should probably be more careful about where you source your firewood." She flinched. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, I don't know," I said with a half-smile. "Sometimes you think you're getting free wood, but it comes with hidden costs." The HOA representatives looked between us nervously. One of them, a young man named Mr. Thompson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Barlow has made some serious allegations against you." "I bet she has," I said, taking a sip of coffee. Brenda turned to him, her voice rising. "This did it! He booby-trapped the firewood! He tried to burn down my house!" The fire inspector, a stern-looking woman named Inspector Mills, walked over, interrupting the argument. "All right, folks, let's stick to the facts. Mrs. Barlow, I've examined the remnants of the firewood in your fireplace. It seems a few logs contained residues of black powder and magnesium." Brenda gasped theatrically. "Black powder? You mean explosives? See, I told you he planted explosives to kill me." Inspector Mills frowned. "Not explosives, ma'am. Not in a dangerous amount. It looked more like theatrical pyrotechnics. Small combustion, designed for noise and smoke, not structural damage." She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Vance, do you know anything about this?" I stayed completely calm. "I know that Mrs. Barlow has been stealing firewood from my backyard for the past month. I have video evidence of her trespassing and removing the logs in question." Brenda's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You can't prove anything." "Oh, but I can," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone. "Remember the cameras? The ones you tried to sue me for? They're very handy." I tapped the screen, bringing up the footage of Brenda's midnight larceny. I handed the phone to Inspector Mills. She watched the video quietly,
her expression unchanging. Then she handed the phone back to me and turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Barlow, the footage is clear. You were trespassing and stealing Mr. Vance's property." The silence that followed was priceless. The HOA representatives looked mortified. The neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama were grinning. Brenda's face turned a shade of red that clashed horribly with her singed hair. She tried to recover, her voice trembling with false authority. "This is harassment! You're all witnesses! He's violating my privacy!" "On my property," I cut in smoothly, "with my cameras, and you trespassed. Want me to call the sheriff to clarify whose privacy was violated here?" She froze. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Inspector Mills spoke again, her voice firm. "Mrs. Barlow, I'd advise you against further comment. The evidence speaks for itself. As for the explosion, while the materials were unusual, the incident occurred within your home using stolen property. I will be filing a report, but I doubt the fire department will pursue criminal charges against Mr. Vance." The HOA representative, Mr. Thompson, sighed. "Brenda, this looks really bad. The management company is aware of the situation. We will be conducting a full review of the HOA board and your actions as president." Brenda's voice cracked. "You're all turning against me? After everything I've done for this neighborhood?" I couldn't resist the jab. "Oh, we appreciate all your hard work, Brenda, especially cleaning up my hazardous firewood for me."
That earned a laugh from the crowd. Even Inspector Mills smiled behind her clipboard. Brenda spun toward me, jabbing a finger in the air. "You'll pay for this, Arthur. I'll sue you for everything you have. Property damage, emotional distress, sabotage." "Emotional distress?" I said, feigning concern. "Was that before or after you trespassed, stole, and burned the evidence of your crime?" A sheriff's car pulled up right on cue. The deputy stepped out, a calm, no-nonsense guy named Deputy Miller. "What's going on here?" he asked. Brenda rushed to him. "Officer, arrest him! He booby-trapped Firewood to hurt me!" Deputy Miller held up a hand. "All right, slow down, one at a time." I handed him my phone with the video paused at the perfect frame. Brenda, mid-theft, under the moonlight. "Here's my footage, officer. That's her stealing the logs in question. I haven't filed a complaint yet because I was hoping she would come to her senses. Then, well, they exploded." He watched the video quietly. Then he looked at her. "Ma'am, is this you?" Brenda swallowed. It's manipulated. You can't tell." He raised an eyebrow. "It's you, Mrs. Barlow, clear as day. This is trespassing and theft." The color drained from her face again. Deputy Miller sighed. "Look, Mr. Vance isn't pressing charges at the moment, but I'm documenting this as an official warning. Any further incidents, any retaliation, and it becomes official." She spun toward me, desperate. "You planned this. You set me up." I shrugged. "I set up cameras. You set yourself up." The neighbors chuckled. Brenda's composure cracked completely. "You're all monsters!" she screamed, tears of rage streaming down her face. "You think this is funny? I run this neighborhood!" Mr. Thompson whispered to the other HOA representative. "Not anymore, she doesn't." Brenda heard it. That was the final straw. She stomped toward her SUV, got in, and slammed the door. She peeled off down the street, tires screeching, leaving a cloud of exhaust and humiliation in her wake. The crowd slowly dispersed. Deputy Miller turned to me and said quietly, "You handled that well, Mr. Vance. Just one piece of advice. Stick to regular firewood from now on." I laughed. "Fair enough, Deputy."
For a few blissful days following the incident, Cedar Creek Estates experienced a strange, unfamiliar sensation. Peace. The silence was golden, but I knew it was the calm before the storm. Brenda wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. I was right. 3 mornings later, a thick envelope arrived from the HOA management company. But this time, it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to all residents. Inside was a formal notice announcing that Brenda Barlow had been immediately suspended from her position as HOA President, pending a formal review and vote by the homeowners. The management company had taken temporary control of the HOA operations. The neighborhood reaction was immediate and unanimous. The group chat exploded with celebration emojis. But Brenda didn't go quietly. She launched a one-woman propaganda campaign. Handwritten flyers appeared in mailboxes, accusing the management company of corruption, conspiracy, and a coup d'etat orchestrated by a dangerous vigilante. That would be me. She bombarded the neighborhood Facebook group with passive-aggressive posts, lamenting the decline of community standards and predicting the imminent collapse of property values. Her persistence was almost admirable. If shamelessness were an Olympic sport, she would have taken home the gold. Meanwhile, the neighborhood moved on. The management company appointed an interim board led by Mr. Jackson, my neighbor, a calm, reasonable man who actually listened to people. Under his leadership, the ridiculous rules were relaxed, the fines stopped, and for the first time, the HOA hosted a community potluck, something Brenda had previously banned due to liability concerns. I brought a brisket I had smoked in my backyard, using my own non-explosive firewood. It was a hit. Halfway through the potluck, Mrs. Gable came over with a slice of pie and whispered, I used to be terrified of her. I think everyone was. Fear is a powerful weapon. Take it away, and the tyrant has nothing left. Mrs. Gable chuckled. Well, now she has nothing left but an inflated ego and a destroyed fireplace. I heard her insurance claim was denied. They called it intentional misuse of stolen materials. I grinned. Karma was working overtime. But Brenda wasn't done. About a week later, she staged her final act of defiance. Around noon, while I was cleaning out my workshop, I noticed a commotion outside her house. I walked out to see Brenda hammering a series of large, handwritten signs into her front lawn. Each one had a message in bold red marker. HOA corruption, unsafe neighborhood, Vance is a menace. She had created her own little protest rally, a revolution of one. I leaned against my fence and called out, Morning, Brenda. Redecorating? She didn't even look at me. You think this is funny, don't you? You ruined my life, but people will know the truth. Funny, the truth has been pretty clear lately. It was even on camera. Her jaw clenched. You'll regret this. I already did, every time I tried being reasonable. She stormed back into her house, slamming the door. By the next day, her signs were gone. The interim board had removed them, citing the HOA bylaw against unauthorized signage that disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the community. The irony of her own rules being used against her was delicious. Still, word spread that she was still planning to sue me personally. I half expected a knock from the sheriff, but instead I got a knock from Mr. Jackson, the interim HOA president. Arthur, he said, smiling, I think you'll appreciate this. He handed me a copy of the cease and desist order the HOA had issued against her. Apparently, Brenda had been harassing board members, showing up uninvited at meetings, and spamming residents with angry emails. She's officially banned from all HOA premises, including the clubhouse, for 6 months. I raised my eyebrows. That might be the most peaceful 6 months of my life.
By late summer, she finally cracked. One morning, I woke up to see a for sale sign planted in her yard, bright red and freshly painted. Rumor had it she was moving to a retirement community in Arizona, one with an even stricter HOA. God help them. The day the moving truck arrived, half the neighborhood came out to watch. It was like a parade. People were walking their dogs, getting the mail, gardening, anything to witness the exodus. Even Mrs. Gable brought out a lawn chair and a pitcher of lemonade. Brenda was furious. "You're all vultures!" she shouted, waving her arms as the movers loaded her furniture. "Ungrateful, ignorant, small-minded hypocrites!" "Careful, Brenda," I called out from my porch. "The last time you got that worked up, your fireplace exploded."
That earned a round of applause and laughter from the crowd. Brenda glared daggers at me, then turned away, climbing into her SUV. As she drove off, she stopped right in front of my house, rolled down the window, and shouted, "You haven't seen the last of me, Arthur Vance." I raised my beer and smiled. "If I do, I'll install more cameras." She slammed the gas pedal, and just like that, she was gone. For a long moment, the neighborhood stood in silence. Then, as if on cue, someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the whole street erupted into applause and cheers. It was like we had all been released from a long, collective nightmare. Jackson walked over, grinning. "Well, Arthur, I think it's safe to say you're a local hero." "Hero is a strong word," I said, chuckling. "I just provided the entertainment." He laughed. "Literally." From that day on, life in Cedar Creek Estates changed completely. The new board was fair and transparent. The petty rules disappeared. The annual potluck became a regular tradition. I'd sit by my fire pit most evenings, sometimes joined by neighbors who'd bring over drinks and stories. Every so often, someone would bring up the Great Firewood explosion, and we'd all laugh until our sides hurt. Sometimes I'd think back to the start of it all. The stolen logs, the ridiculous fines, the camera footage that sparked a revolution. Funny how something so small could ignite such a big change. And maybe that was the real lesson. In an HOA, as in life, sometimes the only way to fight tyranny is with a little well-aimed chaos. I leaned back in my chair, watching the flames dance against the night sky. The air was calm, the stars bright, and for the first time in a long while, Cedar Creek Estates felt like home again.
The first autumn after Brenda left was the most beautiful Cedar Creek Estates had seen in years. It was as if the neighborhood itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The colors seemed brighter, the air cleaner, the silence more profound. The Firewood incident had become a local legend. New residents who moved in after Brenda's exile were told the story in hushed tones, like a suburban ghost tale. I never confirmed or denied the details. A good legend needs a little mystery. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. My workshop became a neighborhood hub. People dropped by to borrow tools, ask for advice, or just share a beer. Brenda's house eventually sold to a young couple. Nice people, full of energy. They ripped out the marble fireplace and replaced it with a modern, energy-efficient wood stove. They planted flowers out front and painted the house a cheerful shade of blue. Definitely not HOA approved back in the day. When I walked up their driveway with a basket of firewood, yes, regular wood, the husband smiled. "You're the guy from the story, huh?" "Depends on which version you heard," I said. He chuckled. "The one where you outsmarted a dictator with a pile of kindling and some applied physics." I shrugged. "That sounds about right." He handed me a beer. Good man. Every neighborhood needs someone who stands up to nonsense. Maybe he was right. Or maybe I just got lucky. Lucky that karma decided to use my engineering skills as its instrument of justice. A few months later, I was in town picking up some supplies at the lumberyard when I saw a familiar figure in the parking lot. It was Brenda. She was loading bags of prepackaged, store-bought firewood into her SUV. She looked up and saw me. We stared at each other for a long moment. Her hair was different, shorter, dyed a darker shade. But the posture, the air of entitlement, it was unmistakably Brenda. I walked over, slowly. "Brenda." "Arthur," she replied, her voice flat. I nodded toward the firewood. "Sourcing it locally, I see." She didn't smile. "I learned my lesson." She closed the trunk and turned to face me. "You ruined my reputation, you know." "No, Brenda," I said quietly. "I didn't ruin your reputation. I just held up a mirror to your actions. You did the rest yourself." She looked like she wanted to argue, to scream,
to unleash the torrent of rage I knew was still simmering beneath the surface, but instead she just sighed, a sound of defeat and exhaustion. "Maybe," she whispered. Then she got into her car and drove away, without another word. I stood there for a long while watching her taillights disappear down the road. It felt like closure. That night, the neighborhood gathered again, around the fire pit. The flames flickered against the circle of smiling faces. Jackson raised his glass. To peace, to freedom, and to the man who reminded us that standing up to bullies never goes out of style. Everyone cheered. I laughed, lifting my bottle. "To Brenda," I said, smirking. "May her next neighborhood have better insurance." In life, there's a fine line between order and control. Brenda thought she was protecting the community, but she was really suffocating it. Her downfall wasn't caused by firewood or fireworks. It was caused by arrogance, by the belief that she was untouchable. And maybe that's why stories like this resonate, because we've all met a Brenda, someone who uses power to belittle others, who mistakes control for leadership. But when patience, ingenuity, and a little bit of black powder collide with that kind of ego, justice has a way of showing up. Sometimes loud, sometimes messy, but always poetic. So here's the lesson. Respect goes both ways. Treat your neighbors fairly. Mind your own yard. And most importantly, don't steal someone else's wood, literal or metaphorical, because you never know when it might blow up in your face. What would you have done in Arthur's place? Would you have gone the explosive route, or would you have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts and your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. I read all of them. And if you enjoyed this wild ride, don't forget to absolutely smash that like button and subscribe to Keys and Chaos for more insane, true-to-life HOA dramas. Because in this neighborhood, karma always collects. And sometimes, it collects with a bang. Thanks for watching.